3 years, every day, the same face across the same fire, the smell of wood smoke and wet wool, the sound of one voice teaching from a borrowed boat. And then he rose, and not one of them knew him, not Mary, standing 6 feet from the empty tomb, asking the man in front of her where they had taken the body. Not Cleopas, walking 11 miles down a dirt road with him from Jerusalem to Emmaus, talking about him the entire way. Not the 7 men dragging an empty net through Galilean water at dawn while he stood on the shore calling out to them. 3 encounters, 3 locations, 3 different groups of people who had spent everything they owned to follow him. And in every single one of them, the recognition came late and never through his face. Stop and let that settle for a moment. These were not strangers. Peter had slept beside him on the mountain. Mary had wept at his feet in a Pharisee's house. Cleopas had heard him preach in the temple courts. They knew his walk, his laugh, the way he tore bread, the calluses on his carpenter's hands. And on the morning that everything they had hoped for had come true, the man standing in front of them looked like someone else. By the time we finish, 3 things will have shifted in how you read these stories. You will know what Luke meant when he wrote that their eyes were held, and the Greek word he used that almost no English translation preserves. You will know what Paul, writing in the year 54, called the body that came out of the tomb, and why it was both the same body and not the same body. And you will know why, in all 3 encounters, the moment of knowing did not come through sight at all. It came through a gesture, a name, a number. If you've ever wondered what actually happened inside that sealed grave between Friday evening and Sunday dawn, if the standard answers have left you with more questions than peace, this is the channel that will sit with the question instead of rushing past it. Subscribe. There is a great deal more coming. Picture them now in the upper room on Sunday night. The doors are bolted. The lamp oil is low. Someone has not eaten in 2 days. They have heard rumors all afternoon. Mary saw him. The men from Emmaus came running back with a story about a meal, and still the room is full of fear because none of it adds up. The man they buried had a name, a face, wounds they could number. Whatever walked out of that tomb was him, and was something more than him. And that is where this begins. Late afternoon, the sun is already leaning west over the Judean hills, and the 2 men are walking out of Jerusalem with their heads down. The road to Emmaus is dust and limestone, 7 miles of it, according to most of the older manuscripts, 60 stadia in Luke's careful count. Their sandals are coated. Their throats are dry. They have been talking the entire way about the man who was crucified 3 days ago, about the women who came back from the tomb that morning with a story no one in the room believed. One of them is named Cleopas. The other, Luke does not name. And while they argue and grieve and try to make the pieces fit, a 3rd man falls into step beside them. He asks what they are discussing. They stop walking. Luke records the detail with surgical care. They stood still, their faces downcast, and Cleopas almost laughs at him. Are you the only one in Jerusalem who does not know what has happened? They do not know who they are talking to. Here is the line in Greek that almost no English translation carries fully. Luke 24, verse 16. Hoi de optalmoi, auton ekratunto, tome epinionai auton. Their eyes were held, that is the verb ekratunto, a passive form third person plural, from krateo to seize, to grip, to hold fast. Held by whom? Luke does not say. But he chose the passive on purpose. Something outside of them was preventing recognition. This is not bad lighting. This is not grief clouding their vision. The same God who opened the eyes of the blind man at Bethsaida is now, in this hour, holding the eyes of two of his own closed, on purpose, while he walks beside them, while he listens to them describe his death in the third person. Sit with how strange that is. He could have shown them at the city gate. He chose not to. He could have spoken their names the way he would speak Mary's at the tomb the next morning. He chose silence. Instead, he asked a question he already knew the answer to and let them tell him their own story, the version they were holding on to, the version that ended at the cross. If you have ever poured out your grief to God and felt as though no one was on the other end of it, felt as though you were speaking into a closed sky, read this verse again, because Luke is telling you something the men on that road did not know yet. The closed sky was the company. The silence walking beside them was him. And the holding back was not absence. It was preparation. Something was being made ready in them that could only be made ready in the dark. The road still had 4 miles left, and he had not yet said a word about himself. And then he begins to speak, not about himself directly, about the texts they have known since they were boys, the ones their fathers chanted at Sabbath, the ones they memorized in synagogue school in whatever village they came from. Moses first, the law, the promise to Abraham that through his seed all nations would be blessed, the bronze serpent lifted in the wilderness so that whoever looked would live, the Passover lamb whose blood on the doorposts turned away the destroyer. He moves through it the way someone moves through their own house in the dark, never bumping into anything, never lost. Then the prophets, Isaiah 53, where the servant is pierced for transgressions and crushed for iniquities, where he is silent before his shearers. Psalm 22, which begins with the words he had cried from the cross 3 days earlier, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and ends with a kingdom that will not end. Daniel's Son of Man coming on the clouds. Zechariah's pierced one whom they would look upon and mourn. Luke compresses all of this into a single verse, chapter 24, verse 27, beginning with Moses and all the prophets. He interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. The Greek word is dihermeneusen, to translate, to open up from inside, to unlock a meaning that was always there but had been sealed. Hear what this means. The man whose body those texts were written about is now walking in the dust of a Judean back road explaining those texts to 2 men who do not know it is him. He is the meaning of every verse he is quoting, and they cannot see it. They will tell each other later, were not our hearts burning within us while he opened the scriptures? But the burning was not recognition. It was something quieter, something underneath. Truth doing its work in them while their eyes still held nothing. There is a person listening to this who has read the same passages 100 times and felt nothing for years. You go through the chapters. You underline. You attend. The words pass through you like water through a strainer, and somewhere in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, a verse you have read since you were 9 years old, your chest catches. You cannot say why. The text has not changed. You have not changed, but something is burning. That is what was happening on the Emmaus Road. The recognition had not come yet, but the fire had been lit, and the man who lit it was the one walking beside them, hidden in plain sight, choosing to stay hidden 1 mile longer. They reach the village just as the light is failing. The man acts as though he will keep going. The road bends, the hills swallow the last of the sun, and Cleopas does what hospitality in first-century Judea required of any decent man. He insists, "Stay with us. The day is far spent. There is bread in the house." The Greek verb Luke uses is parabiasanto. They urged him strongly, almost forced him. They do not yet know they are pulling the risen Christ across their own threshold. Inside the house there is one lamp, a low table, and a loaf of bread that someone, perhaps the unnamed second disciple's wife, set out before they arrived. 3 men sit down. 2 of them are still the hosts. The third is still, as far as they know, a stranger. And then he reaches for the loaf. He takes it, he blesses it, he breaks it, he hands it to them. 4 verbs. Luke uses them in this exact order: labon, eulogeson, ekleson, epedido, and any one of the 11 men back in Jerusalem would have known that sequence in their sleep. They had watched those 4 verbs on a grassy hillside above the Sea of Galilee when 15,000 people sat down on green grass and ate from 5 loaves and 2 fish. They had watched them again at a Passover table 3 nights ago when he said, "This is my body, broken for you." The hands doing it tonight are the same hands. Luke writes the next phrase as if he is afraid to slow down. Dia enoishthasan, oton hoi ophthalmoi. Their eyes were thoroughly opened. The same passive that held them shut now releases them. The verb is the opposite of ekkratunto. Whoever was holding has let go. And in the half-second between the breaking of the loaf and the moment they look up, they know everything. The 7 miles of conversation, the exposition of Moses, the stranger who would not name himself. It was him. It has been him the whole time. And then, Luke says it almost casually, kai autos aphantos egeneto ap auton. He became invisible from them. He vanished. The lamp is still burning. The bread is still warm in their hands. The chair across the table is empty. Sit with the design of this. He did not let them recognize his face. He did not let them recognize his voice. They had heard it for hours. He let them recognize his hands doing the one thing those hands had always done. The risen Christ chose to be known not by appearance, but by gesture, by the act of giving bread away. And every time since that night, that bread has been broken in his name. That is where his face has been waiting. Cleopas and his companion are already on their feet. They do not finish the meal. They do not wait for morning. They walk the 7 miles back to Jerusalem in the dark. Move backward in time one day, Sunday morning, before any of this. A garden outside the city wall, still wet from the night, the smell of crushed grass and the iron tang of cold stone. Mary Magdalena is standing alone in front of an open tomb, and she is weeping the kind of weeping that does not stop to breathe. She turns and sees a man. She assumes he is the gardener. John records that detail in chapter 20, verse 15, with a precision that has the texture of memory. She asks where he has put the body. She is willing to carry it herself. He says one word, Miriam, her name in Aramaic, the way he had always said it, and the whole world reverses on a single syllable. She does not say teacher because she has analyzed his features. She says Rabboni because she has heard her name in the only voice that ever said it that way. Now, move forward again, north to Galilee. A different week, a different body of water. What John calls the Sea of Tiberias, the same lake the locals called Kinneret. 7 men in a boat. Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael of Cana, the 2 sons of Zebedee, and 2 others John does not bother to name. They have been out all night. The nets are empty. Their hands smell of brine and fish slime. Their tunics are wet to the shoulders, and the eastern sky is just beginning to pale. A figure stands on the shore about 100 yards away. John 21, verse 4. They did not know it was Jesus. He calls across the water, "Children, do you have any food?" They answer no. He tells them to cast on the right side. They cast. The net goes heavy, so heavy they cannot draw it in. And right there, before the net is even in the boat, John leans over to Peter and says it. It is the Lord. He did not see a face. The light was wrong. The distance was too far. He saw a number that had not yet been counted, a haul that could not be coincidence. They drag the net to land. Someone counts. 153 fish. Notice the pattern across all 3 encounters. Mary needed her name. The men on the road needed bread. These 7 needed a net so full it almost broke. 3 different doors. Not one of them was his face. The risen body was a body. They touched it. They ate beside it. But it did not announce itself the way it once had. It waited to be found through what he had always done with them, through the specific, through the personal, through the work of their own hands, suddenly bending under a weight they could not explain. If you are still showing up and the prayers feel like words spoken into nothing, hear what this scene is showing you. Recognition does not always come through the obvious channel. It comes through the hand that has been on your shoulder the whole time. Through a small, specific thing that suddenly weighs more than it should. Step out of the boat for a moment, away from the smell of wet rope and gutted fish, and into a rented room in the port city of Ephesus. It is the year 54. A man with bad eyesight is dictating a letter to a scribe, and he is angry. The letter will travel by ship across the Aegean to Corinth, where some of the believers there have been telling each other that a bodily resurrection is impossible. The soul ascends, the body rots. That is the end of the matter. Paul will not have it. He has met the risen Christ himself on the Damascus road. 20 years earlier, he knows what he saw. And in chapter 15 of his first letter to the Corinthians, he tries to put into Greek something that no Greek philosophy had a category for. Verse 44, speratai soma psychikon, agaratai soma pneumatikon. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Pause on the second phrase, soma pneumatikon. The first word, soma, is the ordinary Greek word for body. Physical, occupying space, weighing something. Paul does not soften it. He does not say phantasma, ghost. He does not say pneuma alone, spirit. He keeps the word body and adds an adjective, pneumatikon, animated by, governed by, saturated with the Spirit. He is reaching for something that has no precedent in human language because no one had ever come back like this before. A body, but a body of a kind no anatomist could examine. Real enough to eat broiled fish in front of 7 exhausted men on a beach. Real enough that Mary could grasp at his feet. Real enough to sit at a table in a village house and break a loaf of bread. And at the same time, and this is the part Paul refuses to compromise, a body that could be in Galilee at dawn and in Judea by evening. A body that was not always immediately recognizable to the people who had loved its previous form most. Augustine, writing in Hippo at the close of the 4th century, observed that this is the body the seed becomes. Same identity, transfigured composition, continuous and yet not the same. You buried the wheat. What rises is wheat, but it is not the kernel. This is what makes the 3 failed recognitions in the Gospels not a problem to be solved, but a clue to be followed. Cleopas, Mary, the 7 on the shore, none of them were blind. None of them were stupid. They were looking at a man whose body had crossed a boundary nothing in their categories could hold. He was the same. He was different. And the only way they would know him was the way you know any beloved person, through what only he ever did, through what only he ever said, through the specific weight of his hand. And here is where the strangeness deepens, because if the risen body was so transformed that the people who loved him most did not know him by face, you would expect the wounds to be the first thing erased. A glorified body, a perfected form, no more iron in the wrists, no more gash in the side. And yet John writes the opposite. 8 days after the morning at the tomb, the doors of the upper room are shut again. Thomas, called Didymus, the twin, is finally with the others. He has spent the week refusing to take their word for it. Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. He is not asking for a face. He is asking for damage. And in chapter 20, verse 27, Jesus walks through the wall. That is what the text implies. The doors were shut, stands in front of him, and says it without preamble. Phaeton dactylon so hode. Bring your finger here. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop being faithless. Become believing. The wounds were still there. After whatever happened in that grave, after a body was raised that could appear in a locked room and vanish from a lit table, the holes were still in the hands. The spear wound was still in the side. He carried them. Augustine, preaching in Hippo Regius in the early 5th century, fixed on this detail and refused to let it go. The scars, he wrote, would remain in that body forever, not as deformity, but as honor. Non deformitas sed dignitas. Not what was done to him, but what he had won. The Greek word for those marks in John 20 is typus. The impressions, the imprints, the same word from which we get type, the shape something leaves behind. The cross had left a shape, and he was choosing to keep it. Sit with what this means for the question that has run through all of this. Why was he not immediately recognizable on the road, in the garden, on the beach, and yet entirely recognizable here by the one specific evidence Thomas asked for? Because the risen Christ was not the erasure of the man who died. He was that man transfigured. The history was kept. The cost was kept. What was changed was not whether the wounds had happened, but what they now meant. If you are carrying something you confessed years ago and were told was forgiven, and still it sits in you like a stone, read this verse slowly. The body that walked out of the tomb did not pretend the cross had not happened. It carried the marks of it into eternity. Forgiveness in this story is not amnesia. It is a wound that has become, in some way you cannot yet see, the very place where you are known. So put the 3 doors back in front of you one last time. A loaf, torn open in a village house at dusk. A name, spoken in a garden at first light. A net so heavy it nearly capsized a boat at dawn. 3 doors, none of them his face. At the start of all this, I told you 3 things would shift. Here they are. The first was the word ekratunto, the passive verb in Luke 24:16, and you have it now. Their eyes were held deliberately by the same hand that would later open them. The holding was not abandonment. It was the slow approach of a love that wanted to be found through what it had done, not through what it looked like. The second was what Paul, dictating in Ephesus in the year 54, called the body that came out of the grave, soma pneumatikon, continuous and transfigured, wheat that had been buried as a kernel, real enough to chew bread, strange enough to cross a sealed wall, and still carrying the marks of the nails as honor, not as injury. The third was the pattern itself. The risen Christ refused to be known by appearance. He waited to be known by what only he ever did. As for the people in the story, Cleopas walked back into Jerusalem that same Sunday night and disappears from history's record after telling what he had seen. Mary Magdalena became the first preacher of the open tomb to the 11 men who would not believe her at first. Peter, who had counted 153 fish, would die in Rome under Nero in the mid-60s. Thomas, who needed his hand inside the wound, traveled east according to ancient tradition and gave his life in the subcontinent. John outlived them all and wrote down what he had seen. Every one of them died still telling the same impossible story, and not one of them recanted under pressure they could have ended in a sentence. Now turn to where you actually are. There is the petition you have carried so long you have almost stopped expecting an answer to come. There is the relationship that looks finished from every angle you have studied it from. There is the weight of a child or a parent whose breaking you cannot fix from the outside. There is 3 in the morning, and the fears daylight knows how to manage, but the dark does not. There is the place where God has felt present for everyone in your life, except you, this season, right now. Hold all of it for a moment, the way Cleopas held that loaf before he understood whose hands had broken it. The single thing this whole account has been showing is that he does not arrive in the form you are scanning the horizon for. He arrives through the small act that has always been his, a name said the way only he says it, a meal that suddenly weighs more than its ingredients, a piece of work in your own hands that bends under something you did not put there. The next time you sit down to eat and someone tears a loaf in 2, pay attention. The next time a verse you have read since childhood catches in your chest for no reason you can name, pay attention. The next time someone says your name in a way that undoes you, pay attention. That is the door. That has always been the door. So let us pray. Father, we admit we have been looking for him in the form we remember and missing him in the form he comes. We thank you that the wounds were kept and that our names are still known in the only voice that ever said them rightly. Open in us the eyes that were held. Make us slow enough to recognize the breaking when it comes. And when the petition we have carried for years still seems to go unanswered, give us the company of the stranger on the road, even if we do not know yet that it is him. We ask this in the name of the one whose hands, broken and risen, are still breaking bread for us. Amen. Before you go, tell me which of these stopped you. Was it ekratunto, the passive verb that meant someone was holding their eyes shut on purpose? Was it the moment John leaned over to Peter on the boat and said, "It is the Lord because of 153 fish"? Was it Augustine's line, "Non deformitas sed dignitas," not deformity, but honor? Leave it below. I want to know where this landed. And next we sit with the 8 days between Resurrection Sunday and the locked room where Thomas finally put his hand inside the wound. And the question almost no one asks, where was Jesus during those 8 days? And why did he wait?